And call to order the January 10th, 2019 meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The board does not write the zoning ordinance, but does have the authority to grant relief from it where practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship would result. The board will vote on each agenda item following a public hearing. Use variance requests require a minimum of 6 affirmative votes in order to grant the requested variances. Non-use variance requests require a minimum of 5 affirmative votes in order to grant the variances. If you would like to request that the board table or adjourn your case due to an absence of a full board, which is not the case this evening, we do have a full board. You must inform the chairperson immediately following the public hearing. Petitioners shall do their best to limit their presentations to 10 minutes. Each participant in a public hearing shall do their best to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Before I move along with the agenda, let me start by saying welcome to Mr. Gavin. And the floor is yours if you want to introduce yourself. Tell us a little about yourself.
All right. My name is Robert Gavin. I'm excited to be here. I was a city attorney a number of years ago, and I'm actually excited to be like kind of at a table, you know, being on one of the boards rather than actually practicing law doing it. So I'm quite excited to be here, and I'm thankful for the opportunity. So.
Welcome aboard. You're welcome. And in that same note, Mr. Gavin is going to be replacing Mr. Muller, who served on this board since 2001. So I just wanted to take a moment and thank Bob for his years of service. I mean, to think that he was appointed in 2001 by Mayor Yerk is pretty incredible. He was a great historian. He will certainly be missed at this table. And Mr. Kroll?
Thank you. I remember Leslie Anderson, myself, and Bob. I was appointed in 2002, the first go around, and Bob was here when I got here. I came back in 2016, and Bob was still here. To have served at the same table with Bob twice was really a blessing. Bob spoke. He wasn't the loudest guy here, but he certainly was one of the smartest. And he had just a way of understanding and putting in perspective. And I think everybody that worked with him up here or in anything he does comes away with just a great feeling. I would like to ask the city commission in the city of Royal Oak to do a proclamation for Bob. And I would like to make a motion of that if I can get support, and I think we can.
I'll support that.
Thank you, Leslie.
All right. Any comments from the supporter?
Well, pretty much everything Alan said. I just also believe that his insight was so invaluable to this board. He was just he was honest and straightforward, and you know, we should all look to try and get to that point. So
For sure.
That's it.
Okay. Before I call for the vote, does anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah,
That's
you're not
after
a
me.
bad model.
All right, well, with that being said, I'll call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you, Mr. Kroll. All right, so that moves us on to our normal agenda here. I'm looking for an approval of the minutes for the December 13th meeting.
I'll move to approve them with one correction. Number 5 says it was moved by Mr. Anthony. I think that is supposed to be Mr. Opak.
Mr. Anthony has a nice ring to it.
Aren't we calling him that now?
He's
I'm in trouble. Anthony or Mr. Anthony?
Mr. Anthony Opak.
Yeah, I like that.
Here, we have a motion.
Oh, second.
Seconded by Mr. Anthony.
Anthony.
Any other corrections, additions, deletions? Not seeing any. I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? There's that, sir. All right. We don't have any old or unfinished business, so that moves us right along to our first item of new business, item D1, which is case number 190101, public hearing on the appeal of Italy American Construction petitioner Nicholas Bofferding. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. All right.
Just like it
I'm on a roll.
sounds. Just like it sounds.
For the following variances, waive 0.08% of the maximum allowable lot coverage of 10% for a detached accessory structure, a garage, and B, waive 1.8% of the maximum allowable lot coverage total of 30% to permit construction of a 240 square foot addition to an existing 528 square foot detached accessory structure located at 2012 Massoit. Mr. Murphy, little L.
This site contains a single-family home and an existing 528 square foot detached garage. The petitioner is proposing to construct an addition, a rear addition to that garage at the full width of it at 10 feet in depth, and that results obviously in a 240 square foot addition. Therefore, the total size of the modified structure will be 568 square feet, which is 10.8% of the lot area. Our ordinance allows for a maximum of 10% of the lot area. Garages or accessory structures can cover no more than 10% of the lot area, so they're slightly over that. In addition, the ordinance states that all the structures on the site cannot exceed more than 30% lot coverage. The proposed addition would push the lot coverage over, and it would result in 31.8% total lot coverage. So they're seeking a waiver of that requirement as well. Before you ask the question, the maximum allowable size garage that they could build without any waivers, meaning they would be compliant with the total lot coverage as well as the maximum allowable accessory lot coverage, would be in addition the full width of the back of the garage, 24 feet by 4 feet in depth. And again, they're asking to make that 24 by 10, and the necessary variances that are associated with that.
Any questions for Mr. Murphy? All right, not seeing any, is the petitioner present? Yeah, please come forward and tell us about your plan.
Good evening. I'm the contractor representing the client, and the plan was...
What's your name and
Oh,
address,
I'm
sir?
sorry. Michael Mastroianni. I'm with Italy American Construction.
Thank you.
In
Please,
the,
floor is
I'm sorry,
yours.
yeah, the plan was, as it was explained, to put an additional 10 feet in depth, 24 foot in width on the back of the garage currently at the residence. And the hardship mainly comes from storage needs. My client, who's deep rooted in the community, has 3 kids. The house that they currently reside in only offers so much storage in regards to the things that they need for their day-to-day activities and their family needs. The garage is a very low impact extension past what would currently be considered acceptable without the variance. So the extra 6 feet would still be well disguised in the backyard. It's a kind of a heavily wooded area in the backyard, if you can see on the sky view, if you guys have that. Naturally, it's going to blend in well with the surroundings, and overall, we feel like it would allow for him to meet his hardship.
Any questions for the petitioner?
I just have a comment that hardship, I don't think that's really on our list, storage. Is there any other hardships?
Well, so the storage is kind of like a caveat to the hardship. The hardship being, they feel like they've outgrown their home. They want to stay like in, the area, and they love the street, the neighborhood. This would allow them the storage needs that they lack to remain in the home. They feel like they've outgrown their space, and this is just a way of, I guess, ensuring that they can stay in the home that they love.
Yes, sir.
Did you approach your neighbors or receive any approval from the neighborhood?
So my next door neighbor
Sir,
directly.
can I ask you to come to the microphone? That way the people at home can hear you as well.
Oh, sure. Nick Bofferding, I'm the homeowner. My son Jackson, number 1 of 3.
Jackson?
So,
Jackson gonna talk?
no, he's missing his little brother's concert right now at Adams, so he's happy to be here.
Yeah.
So directly to the east of my house are the Tierras. They're actually, they're in Florida at the moment. But I've told them about the plans, and we talk over the fence. We go swimming in their pool. They know about the plans. They're great neighbors, great neighborhood. Backyard neighbor, because we back up to their garage. I don't think I've talked to them in 15 years, just because that part of the lot just doesn't get used. So from the street, you wouldn't see how deep the extension is, and from the backyard, it's garages backing up to garages. I think it's not visible.
And Joe, of course, this was noticed to 300 feet.
Correct.
And the audience is packed with upset members, obviously, so. All right. Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm not ready. I don't have.
All right. All right, anything else that you gentlemen want to add?
I don't know. If
Well, I
you-
didn't see your hand, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask them, so have you considered that you are able to add 4 feet, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is there some reconfiguring in the garage that will, they have these great storage
So,
things these days, and you could possibly utilize some of that upper attic part.
Yeah, so what started the conversation in our house was biking. So we do road rides. My wife and I do charity rides, Bike MS. I'm actually on the steering committee for Bike MS. We do road rides, so my wife and I and Jackson, we have road bikes, we have mountain bikes, we also have hybrid bikes, and he has 2 brothers, so we have like 15 bikes, and it just takes space. And so some are at my parents' house, and so there's that. We camp. We have a pile of camping gear in the basement that is in the way. So bikes, camping gear, sporting equipment. It's just we're bursting.
Well, you're a man after my own heart. I have 8 bikes of my own, so I do the Make-A-Wish ride every year, so.
That's good. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah. The Wham is a good one.
Yeah, it's a great one. All right, any other questions? All right, I'm going to ask you gentlemen to take a seat real quickly. I'm going to open up the public hearing. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to address the board on this matter? All right, not seeing anybody, I will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to this side of the table for any additional discussion. Mr. Kroll?
I'm prepared to make a motion to approve this variance. Both of them.
Both A and B. We have a motion.
I'll second.
Support by Mr. Klatt. Mr. Kroll?
Well, I was kind of crawling around in the backyard, so I'm in agreement with him. I tried to get back there to see exactly who this was going to bother. I mean, I thought that really coming in front of us to ask for a 1.8% and 1.2% was a lot. But when I went in the backyard and I really saw that nobody would be bothered by this because nobody could see it, I thought it was reasonable.
Any other comments? Mr. Klatt?
I think it's just a very simple, clean design. They just extended the roof line to the back. I think it will go unnoticed. As you mentioned, you spoke with your neighbors. I don't think it'll impact anyone in the backyard. So I'll be in support. And just one comment too, I think you mentioned, is there a creative way they can gain height? But by that extension of the roof line, there isn't much height in that existing garage. It looks pretty, is that 8 or 9 foot ceiling height in there?
It's pretty flat. I mean, I got some boards in the rafters and a Christmas wreath goes up there in the summer, and there's not much more height.
So you can't take advantage of any additional height for storage.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm torn on this one because, in my opinion, this is brought upon themselves of needing more space for more stuff that they have. And they could have increased the roof as well as the 4 feet to gain more spaces, as we've seen in the past on garages. But I also agree this really is low impact. So some of the hardships are there and some of them aren't, because they can't help that they have a smaller lot, that they can't get the 800 feet. But then again, because they have a smaller lot, they're coming up on that 30% related to it. So I'm sort of torn because, yes, I'd like to grant them it, but at the same time, if we're going on hardship, they haven't met all the criteria, so I have a hard time with that.
Anybody else?
These always are difficult for me too, because I look at them and I see that, yes, if you had a little bit bigger lot, you'd be able to have your 800 square foot garage. They are under the 800 square feet, even with going over the lot max. So it's always, this is a tough one sometimes.
Yeah, no, these are definitely tough ones, and the points that you two raised are definitely valid. And I just see a gentleman who wants to find a reason to stay in Royal Oak, and I don't think what he's asking for is too overbearing to the point where I'm willing to say no to it. I'm prepared to grant it. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on it? All right, not seeing any, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Who's the nay?
Mr. Anthony.
All right. Motion passes. You're all set. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We could have taken a little longer for you.
All right, that moves us along to our second item of new business, which is item D2, case number 190102, public hearing on the appeal of Schneider Smith Architects, petitioner RT&S Building LLC, owner for the following variances. A, waive 6,500 square feet of the minimum required lot area of 12,000 square feet. B, waive 8 feet of the minimum required drive aisle width of 20 feet when parking spaces are accessed at a 90-degree angle to permit construction of a 3 single-family attached dwelling units located at 921 South Center Street. Mr. Murphy.
In December, the Planning Commission granted site plan approval for the drawings that you see in front of you, the contingent upon receiving these variances from the Zoning Board of Appeals. The site is 5,500 square feet of lot area. And, I should back up and say that last year you saw this particular property associated with the property to the east of the alley. It's commonly owned by the petitioner. There's currently a single-family dwelling on this particular site. They were previously approved for a development on the Main Street frontage that had an associated surface parking lot, which is this particular site, which is in front of you now. The next case will be their site on Main Street. They're coming forward with the different approvals, 2 separate approvals for each site now different plans. So the case that's in front of you now is for 3 single-family attached dwelling units. Again, next case will involve the property across the alley, entirely separate piece of property, entirely separate development.
So that's why the 2 were not combined? Okay.
Correct. With that said, this particular site, the site on the west side of the alley that faces Center Street, is a fairly small lot at 5,500 square feet, and the petitioner is proposing a 3-unit dwelling, a 3-unit complex. Based on our current ordinance requirements, it requires a certain size property for that number of units, which they are unable to meet. Therefore, they're seeking a variance from that lot size standard for 3 units. And I'll reference for the next variance request, if I can zoom in on it and have it stay still. We'll look at the site plan that was provided, and it will illustrate site access and maneuverability. There's a one-way drive that's defined off of Center Street, and it goes through, transects the property and exits to the alley. The parking spaces, the 5 of the 6 parking spaces are located underneath, and we'll show a 3D rendering that'll be helpful to visualize it, are located underneath the middle dwelling unit. And those spaces are accessed at a 90-degree angle. Technically, under the ordinance requirements, a one-way driveway needs to be a minimum width of 12 feet, and obviously a 90-degree parking space, when somebody backs out of a 90-degree parking space, that allows them the ability to go one way on the drive aisle or the other. Whereas if you're parking off of a true one-way driveway, you would park on an angle, and the natural ability when you back out is to then only continue to go forward. At 90 degrees, technically you can go in one direction or the other. So they are seeking a waiver from the standard that requires that it be a truly one-way design for the orientation of the parking associated with that defined one-way driveway. There are nearby parking lots similar to this, and the petitioner can speak to how those function, especially at a site that only contains 5 parking spaces in this manner. With that, we can take a look at the 3D rendering that the petitioner has provided, so you have a clear understanding as to how that functions. And the one-way drive, again, is off of Center Street. The parking spaces are accessed at a 90-degree angle underneath the building. There is 1 parking space that's off of the public alley. The 5 are located on the internal portion of the site.
Any questions for Mr. Murphy?
I'm just trying to recall this case. Last time it was before us, this was going to be used as a parking lot for Main Street property.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Correct. And that was, both of these sites are owned by the petitioner. That was going to be developed as one development. This site as the off-street parking component of that entire development. Now, even though they're owned by the same individual, both pieces of property, they're being developed, and they'll stand independently of each other at the end of the day.
It's the same petitioner from the
Correct.
last time.
All right, any other questions? All right, not seeing any, are the petitioners present?
Good evening. I'm Jim Schneider, Schneider Smith Architects. Mr. and Mrs. Cassis are also here. They're the property owners. Joseph did a pretty good job of explaining this. The Cassises approached us after they had gotten the variance for the parking lot. The neighbors basically due north of this were not enthralled with the idea of a parking lot next to them, and they asked us to take a look at the whole development. We did. We told them that we thought there was a much better way to develop this property and utilize the property and still basically meet the end goal. But using that property as just a parking lot really would be a very unfortunate use for it. So out of that, we came up with this idea. With regard to the 12-foot wide drive, the parking still functions with adequate space that you would have in a parking lot with 20-foot room for backing up. And as Joseph referenced, our office is on this street. Our office was approved with basically the same parking configuration. Due south of our office is a psychologist's office, which is occupying single-family home that's been converted. Their parking was approved the same way. So essentially, the drive comes in off of Center Street, exits to the alley, but there's adequate space for backing in and out of the parking spaces. So addressing that particular thing, strict application of the zoning ordinance with regard to that really doesn't take into consideration sort of the unique layout that can occur on this particular property that allows for 90-degree parking with a one-way lane adjacent to it. With regard to the density, this property is zoned mixed use too. The goal of the master plan is ultimately to see this area redeveloped. There's somewhat of a conflict between the zoning ordinance and the master plan because the zoning ordinance basically allows what would be single-family density on this property, even though it's zoned mixed-use too, and the goal is a greater density in sort of a transitional zone. So we believe that this is a very good use for this property. The building meets the building size. We have adequate green space, setback requirements, everything else. So we believe that the spirit of the ordinance is basically taken into consideration here, and that this project, does essentially meet what the ordinance is, or what the master plan is looking at. So be happy to answer any questions if you've got anything particular.
Yes, sir.
I got a couple. How is, I see you got the trash on there. How is the trash going to be accessed?
Basically, there's green space along the south side of the property. It's a patio space.
Right.
And everyone has access to it, so.
No, when it comes to collection time.
Basically, the trash here would be handled the same way the trash is at your house. You would take your receptacle and put it at the alley, because the trash pickup is in the alley, and on trash day it would be
Okay,
picked
that's
up.
what I was wondering, if it was going to be the trash, we're going to come down here. I was going to say, how are they going to get,
Right, yeah,
into-
no, the truck won't come on the site to
Okay.
access it.
it would be coming down the alley.
Right.
Any other questions?
Oh, I had one more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to remember what it was. I got distracted. I'll ask. if
Okay.
it comes-
While you're thinking about it, again, the trash. What's the distance between the house to the south
The house to the south and
and
our
the trash
property,
containers where they'll be sitting on this?
I think there's essentially a 5-foot side yard setback, but those trash containers are enclosed. There's a structure built that they're enclosed in.
Meaning not with a ceiling to it?
No, it has a roof over it.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, on the site plan, they've got a
Yeah, there's a
detail
section
of it,
drawing. if you get
section
it.
of it.
Mr. Oak, you want the floor back, or
No, it hasn't came back to me. I'm sorry.
long day? All right, anybody else? Not seeing any questions, I'm going to ask you to take a seat real quickly and see if there's anybody in the public who wants to comment on this. Is there anybody who would like to address the board on this matter? All right, not seeing anybody, I will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to this side of the table for additional discussion. Sir.
I'll make a motion to approve the variances as requested.
Both A and B?
I'll support.
Mr. Olfak?
I do think, even though this is smaller than what the ordinance wants, this is in the downtown area, and I do agree we would want to increase the density long-term as part of the master plan, and this seems like a very nice project to do so. It's very unique. Actually, now I remember a question whether or not this was going to be owned or leased out as apartments, like condos versus apartments, but.
The intent is that it'll be leased property.
Okay, leased, okay. But I can understand it's going to be tough for a couple of those spots to get in there, so I am worried a little bit about that, but again, it's one of those things of water will come to level where it needs to be, so I like it, it's a nice project, and I think it can work. And even though it's got these unique hardships of being downtown in a single-use area that's really starting to build up around there, so I'm in support of it.
Anybody else? Ms. Anderson?
I think it works well for that area. I do know that it may be a little tight to turn, but I have to be tight turning when I go and pay my State Farm bill all the time, and I seem to make it okay at the other end of the city. And another thing that I like is that it's not going to be a parking lot, because they did take down 2 properties at the opposite end of the street. Huntington Bank did, I believe, and they paved all that. So I like to see that there's, like everybody says, a nice transition into the city.
Yes, sir.
I think this is a great project. When I look at some of the blight in Royal Oak, I think a lot of it's on South Main Street, and the thought of getting rid of that in replace of this, I'd be the happiest guy in the world if I lived over there on Hudson Street looking at this complex as opposed to what they're looking at now.
Yes, sir.
I'll be in support as well. I think it's a very thoughtful concept. You know, they're able to maximize density without overtaxing this property. And when it comes to the drive aisle, I understand it's narrow, but there is good through traffic from Center Street to the alley as well. And there is full depth behind those spaces. And I think people will just figure it out over time, you know, as they live in the units. And then when it comes to the lot area, like I said, it's not overtaxed. The massing is great, and it minimizes the impact on the overall site. So I'll be in full support.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I was a little worried when I first looked at these plans, especially about like overtaxing the site and how it would look in the surrounding area, because I wasn't super familiar with that area. But when I went and checked it out, it fit. I think it'll go quite well in that area. So I think I'm going to be in support of this as well.
Anybody else? Yeah, going back in time on the Plan Commission, this is actually one of the areas that we talked about in quite some detail in terms of, you know, what kind of development do we want in these transitional zones, and I'm glad that you brought up the point about it being zoned the way that it is zoned, and frankly, this is exactly the type of project we were hoping that the new zoning would create, so I'm glad to see this come along, and I'm happy to support it. Is there anybody else? All right, not seeing any, I will go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes. That moves us right along.
That's really too bad, because we always turn one down a night, you know.
Item D3, case number 190103, public hearing on the appeal of Schneider Smith Architects, petitioner, and RT&S Building LLC owner for the following variances. A, waive 30,044 square feet of the minimum required lot area of 39,000 square feet. B, waive 13 of the minimum required 31 off-street parking spaces to permit construction of a 3-story mixed-use building with ground-level office space and 12 upper-level multiple family dwelling units located at 924 South Main Street. Mr. Murphy.
The site, opposite side of the alley, frontage on Main Street. It's a little less than 9,000 square feet in lot area. And for the number of residential units they're proposing, they need a waiver from the lot area requirement. There is a proposal which involves office and parking on the ground floor with 2 levels of residential above. The zoning ordinance does require 2 off-street parking spaces for each of the residential dwelling units. There are 12 residential dwelling units that are proposed, so that component requires 24 off-street, dedicated off-street parking spaces in and of itself. And the office component on the ground floor, based on its size, it would require 7 parking spaces associated with it. So 24 and 7, the total of 31. There are 18 off-street parking spaces located under the building on the ground floor. And we can reference the floor plan and the renderings provided to give you an idea of how that's accessed, but 18 parking spaces under the building. They're seeking a waiver of that difference. Also, we did receive a correspondence from an adjacent property owner that's included in your packet for your reference, and he was unable to be here tonight, so we included it, as we always do.
Any questions for Mr. Murphy? Yes, ma'am.
I have another question about the prior action. Last time, they were just in front of us for a parking variance. Why is the lot coverage there now and it wasn't there before? Because it still exceeds the requirement, didn't it?
Yes, it probably was. I maybe mistakenly didn't reference it in this report, but I'm certain that it would have, yes.
Any other questions? All right, you're back up.
Again, we were asked to look at this site, and we felt that there was a better utilization of this particular piece of property as well. This building we designed, again, looking at the master plan and sort of the goals for this area, to come up with a building that kind of engaged the street at street level. So we've got an office use there rather than just doing all parking underneath the building. And then we've lifted up the apartments and pushed it back and created some public space on the roof, some communal space for the residents. So we think this is a great project for that corner. If I might address the density first, I believe the reason it wasn't an issue last time was because they looked at both pieces of property. They added the square footage together, so the density wasn't, it was a combined density for the 2 properties, but they still were, I still believe they were below or above the required square footage. So, but again, we think that there's a disconnect between the zoning ordinance and the master plan here. And again, this is zoned mixed use too. The goal is density to some degree. And the way that the zoning ordinance reads, it limits the density that you can put in. So we think this is consistent with a number of other projects that have been approved around the city. The majority of multifamily that's happening, there are density issues and density increases in order to just make it a viable project. To give you an example, we were looking at this property, and if this is going to be 12 one-bedroom units, so essentially 12 residents, plus a very modest office space of 1,600 square feet. If you were to develop this site as all office, for instance, above parking, and then utilize the center street as a surface parking lot again, you would potentially look at up to 70 or 80 people in a building like that. So that density thing is a little bit skewed in terms of, when you speak about density and intensive use of the property. So again, we think there's a disconnect there. With regard to the parking variance, we believe this will generate 1 parking spot per unit because they're all 1-bedroom units. Again, the zoning board has been looking at variances on a number of multifamily projects, and the average variance seems to be about 1.5 parking spots per unit. That would get us to the 18 parking spots. So at a 1.5 number, we have 18 for the units, but we believe the office use is going to be offset time-wise from the residential use. So, and the parking is not assigned. So we firmly believe that there's adequate parking and that, we're confident that this project works and meets the intent of the ordinance, if you will, if not the letter of the ordinance, so.
Any questions for Mr. Schneider? All right, not seeing any, and we have nobody left in the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and open and close the public hearing. And I'll bring it back to this side of the table.
I'd like to move to approve the variances as requested.
Motion by Mr. Curtis. Second by Mr. Kroll. Mr. Curtis?
I love it. I think this is what we're looking for, my opinion, that this is what we're looking for. And I see the hardship as being caught in the midst of transition here. You know, the idea of a plan for development in our city with some ordinances that haven't caught up with that plan entirely. And so I think that there is sort of a disconnect as Mr. Schneider was articulating. And again, the use of parking is often offset by what time of day it is. So people are not typically home at the same time people are at work. So again, some come and some going, and one-bedroom apartments seems to be the wave of the future, which is an interesting fact in our culture, that people are fine with little space, less space, and it's probably a good thing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just see this as a great project. I mean, I look at that building that's sitting there now as opposed to this, and I just think it's wonderful. I'll be strongly in support of it.
Yes, sir.
I am concerned about the parking, because although you got 12 spots for the parking and it's not assigned, and the office space requires 7, I am a little worried about that. Granted, people will just park on streets or whatnot if they need to, although I feel bad for a resident if someone who's staying long at the office has their spot. I'm a little concerned there. Joseph, I have a question. When you did the calculations, and forgive me, my brain's a little fried today. When you do space allocation, once you have toilet rooms and mechanical rooms, that gets taken out of it. So theoretically, the requirement of 7 for the office would drop to like 6, possibly.
No, I believe we accounted for that.
Okay, if you counted for that, that's fine then.
There was some, I believe in the floor plan, there was an illustration of restrooms and mechanical rooms. We can look at the floor plan, but I'm almost certain that there was.
Because the current one that I'm looking at doesn't, unless I missed it.
No, there wasn't. So what happens under the ordinance, if this thing will stop jumping around on me? I want to reference it in our conversation here. The floor space is shown as an open floor space concept. Yes, they will need all those components that you referenced. When there's a floor plan that's just an open floor plan like what's shown, it doesn't reference the exact floor plan that they're going to have with restrooms and storage rooms. The ordinance requires us to count the whole area at 85%, meaning it's a standard deduction of 15% of a floor area for restrooms and storage. So the application of 85% of this floor area shown was taken to get 7 parking spaces.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm just concerned about the parking also. The square footage requirement, I'm not concerned about because of the transitional nature of the area, but there could be fewer apartments in the same footprint and require less parking. But there's no neighbors here who are complaining that they're worried about people taking their parking spots. So I'm conflicted about this because I hate to see more parking demands in the city right now.
Hey, Jim, can you come back up for a second? Because the concerns that they're raising is actually something that was on my mind also. Do you plan on taking 12 spots inside of the parking and designating it for the residents only, and then creating a 6-spot bank?
No, I think at this point it'll be open parking for the office users or the apartment users. Really, we do a lot of multifamily all over the place, and, more and more, we're seeing one-bedroom apartments, we're seeing people that want to live alone, and we're seeing one car. And, you know, with all the talk about walkability, the bike lanes we're putting in, I've sat on the stormwater task force for the last 18 months the city's had. One of the things we've actively been talking about is looking at reducing our parking needs because of the stormwater generation that's required by all the hard surface. So, you know, we've been doing this a long time, and you know, we would be hesitant to propose a project that we felt did not have adequate parking. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation yesterday about one of our projects in Holland, Michigan, where they're proposing adding units and taking parking away as a way to make their numbers better, and we said, don't do it. I mean, you know, you're going to strip yourself of adequate parking. So we're very conscious of what is adequate parking. Also, our office is on Center Street, so we have a pretty good grasp of, you know, what the traffic's like here and what the parking demand is, and there's not a great parking demand. In addition, there's parking in front of this building. There's street parking available, so we don't see it as a, you know, as a problem.
How many spaces are there in front, do you
There's
think?
at least 4.
We'll look at the photograph.
Those aren't metered either, those aren't metered down there, are they?
Not that far
It
south.
looks like 3 or 4.
Not yet.
There's also parking on the side street too, and there was
Correct.
not that many people there when I swung by this afternoon.
And I'll make the comment that once the development is done, you're gonna have more on-street parking in front of the business. There's a
Right.
drive aisle there now.
Right, exactly.
There's less parking than what will be there after the development is over. Right here, you'll see. This portion here, there'll be no need for a curb cut based on your concept.
Correct.
Mr. Clark, did I see your hand?
No, yeah, I did. I agree with Mr. Schneider's assessment of the parking. I feel that a reduced ratio is appropriate here for this unit type. And we see the same thing with our developments that in other communities, and several around town have been approved at a reduced ratio too, at a 1.5 or even fewer. So I don't think there'll be a parking issue here based on the unit types. These are one-bedroom units.
Ms. Anderson?
I may have missed it. The fitness center that you have labeled, that's just for the residents?
Just for the residents, correct.
Yeah, getting back to my original question, I mean, in terms of the overall parking numbers, I absolutely buy it. I think that the amount that you're providing is adequate based on the type of use that you're proposing. I guess my only quasi-concern is that if you have 12 residents and they have a dedicated parking spot, then we don't have to worry about any potential conflict. You know, a guy gets home from work at 5:30 and the guy in the office is working till 8. He doesn't have a spot, so he's leaving his car on the street all night. And anytime we can take parking off of the street, obviously, it's
Right.
always the goal to do that.
They could do that. I mean, they could designate 12 spots for, you know, 12 specific spots for 12 units.
You can probably put the office people on the street, really.
Well, yeah.
Because theoretically, the office people will go home at some point in time, 7, 8 o'clock, whatever it is.
Actually, I was a little more happy with the idea that they weren't assigned, because then there would be that ebb and flow of the people who needed to use the office could have space to park during the day, and even maybe customers that would park there to go in if they needed, I don't know what's going to be there, but that's why I'm more on board with the way they have it now than assigning spaces.
Would there be access to the businesses from the parking lot, or would they have to get out and walk around to the front of the building?
No, there'll be access from both sides.
I mean, I can see an argument for both. I mean, what you're
Right.
saying is absolutely valid, and I can also see getting home from work and not having a spot and being mad. So,
Well, I guess everybody who would lease the place would already know that.
all right.
So-
And when you move into an urban dense area, that's one of the things that I guess you have to anticipate.
It's not like you have to mark miles if
No,
that
exactly.
occasionally happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Certainly not a deal breaker.
And as I usually say, it's the developer's risk, I guess.
Always
People
have them
don't want to
spill
use
over.
it because there's no parking, then they won't.
You can always have them spill over to the architects.
Fine. Parking that we need,
That's what
so.
we should do. That's the motion that all the extra parking goes in front of him.
Yeah, with a little change thing on my belt.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Then I will go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? You're all set. Thank you, sir.
Nice project.
We don't have any other business, I'm assuming? No. And any comments on the report?
I was good. Yes, that was the only thing.
Annual
Nope.
report.
Other than,
Oh, that's gonna be a killer project,
All right.
man.
Well, if there's nothing else for the good of the body, Mr. Gavin, would you like to introduce the mystery motion?
I move to adjourn.
Most support.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.